9 months into the second Trump administration, and the MAGA baby has been birthed, stretching the boundaries of the unitary executive to FDR levels and beyond, stretching the boundaries of etiquette to Nixonian levels and beyond. President Trump, number 47, has surprised no one by essentially doing exactly what he promised and set out to do. This has both enraged the progressive left, captivated and further empowered the MAGA right. And aside from two surprises that I can count, at least so far, the one namely being the extent and recklessness of his tariffs on the one hand, that caught everyone with their pants down, even those who believed and knew that he would lay out some tariffs, but in this way and to that extent. And on the other side, the Epstein files, which we knew were lurking in the background, but the extent to which they have short-circuited Trump's own base is also very surprising. But as I'm saying, aside from these two, the tariffs and Epstein, we can take a time machine back to late November 2024, and all the fears and trepidations of the left, along with the hopes and dreams of the right, have more or less come into play. Now the question is, how will the Democrats gear up to the midterms in 2026? And so far, by any stretch of the imagination, they've been doing pretty bad. Hello and welcome to the Bald and Bloviating podcast. I am your Bald and Bloviating host, Mookie Spitz, and today I am going to cover off on the four lost liberals of the Democalypse. We're going to look into the mirror to understand why Trump won again, but with a focus on the big question for the American left. How can they possibly retake the House, maybe someday the Senate, let alone win back the White House? Welcome aboard. We've covered this topic in a few ways, but this podcast will focus on four people. They are four Democrats crossing the full spectrum, I believe, of the left, from the left, folks we can consider leftists by their own definition, all the way to the moderate left, all of whom are stunned, frustrated, and like most liberals, Democrats, from one end to the other, have no idea what their own party is doing. So let's spend a little time taking a look at these folks and understanding their point of view. Democrats are, after all, short-circuiting, licking their wounds, hurling blame. How could Donald Trump, after doing everything he did, saying everything he said, and promising everything he's promised, not only to win the Electoral College, but to win the popular vote too, and do so with the help of millions of minority voters, traditionally the bedrock of liberal support? If few things are surprising now of the Trump administration, what's definitely surprising prior to his win is the extent to which minority voters shifted to support him, destroying decades of convention, upending the American left, and creating this paradoxical, frustrating situation as far as figuring out what the hell to do next. 4 American friends of mine, in retrospect, were harbingers of this radical shift, personally exemplifying the feelings and frustrations that have forced their party to tear itself down, and now, somehow, maybe with some of the insights gleaned here, build itself back up. The transformation of the national political scene has been long overdue, and like most surprises, in retrospect, seems inevitable had we only listened to voices like these before. And I will fess up to being guilty on this front as well. We are all in our bubble. Many of us are bubbled within a bubble within a bubble. So that's why I'm lifting up the hood, if you will, on this rundown jalopy that is the American Democratic Party, and taking out the alternator, taking out the carburetor, taking out the bits and pieces that make it up, maybe clean them off a little bit, see what went wrong from the point of view of the lifeblood of the party, most of whom, by the way, were not listened to. Better now than never. Let's start with Kevin. He does bongs, semicolon. They do bongs. He wrote that on the chalkboard in front of our senior high school English class, demonstrating the proper use of that semicolon. Prankster and savant, delinquent and disciple, Kevin is an inner city Latino kid whose single mother had hustled him into the Chicago suburbs, where he flourished as a beacon of bombast and bullshit. By sheer chance, we wound up on the same floor of the same dorm building in college. Taking his savoir-faire for sex, drugs, and rock and roll to new heights, Kevin roomed with a like-minded Illinois guy to create their party den of nonstop bong smoking, rum drinking, and heavy metal listening. We had great political convos too, and it's a real shame that I hardly listened to him then and don't remember much of them. After our sophomore year, we scattered across the country. Kevin winding up in Flint, Michigan. Yes, that Flint, Michigan. And enduring the full extent of the water pollution crisis there. Suffering from chronic health issues for the rest of his life, his anger at the government transferred into hatred for the Democrats. The party ostensibly committed to preventing such a tragedy and supporting him afterwards, neither of which ever, as we know, happened. Now, throughout it all, we stayed in touch, and he even visited me when I was living in New York City, where we continued our endless conversations about science, math, and politics. Good friends until the 2016 election. Everything changed when he declared himself opposed to Hillary Clinton's presidency. Passionately left-leaning his whole life, his de facto handing of his vote to Trump by not voting for Clinton felt shocking and absurd to me. Just think about the Supreme Court, I implored him at the time. Trump wins, and he'll have the chance to appoint 1, maybe even 2 new justices. Nothing else really matters, and our choices in our political system are binary. You don't vote for Hillary, how much you might hate Hillary, and the legacy Democrats, you're automatically voting for Trump. And if you vote for Trump, he's going to put in his judges and justices. And that, more than anything else, will set back your agenda 10, 100 times worse than if we just keep electing dysfunctional and shitty Democrats. His answer was quite simple. You're a child. And then we stopped talking. His loss of faith in the Democrats was complete and damning. The Democrats no longer mattered. They had to be defeated. The party had to be recreated. Now, at the time, I dismissed Kevin, my high school bong smoking, rock and rolling, Flint, Michigan suffering, super leftist, as an anomaly. The weird and fun inner city kid and reefer mascot that we had adored in high school. He was my fellow science geek, but he had fallen off the deep end when it came to voting against his own best interests. But here's the thing, he wasn't alone that election cycle. Numerous other friends, especially those I had grown up with in Chicago, lower middle class, north side of Chicago, were also throwing in the towel on the entire party. There was a movement afoot. There was a movement of disaffected liberal Democrats that was happening in parallel to the disaffected conservative Republicans exemplified by the Tea Party. The whole notion of the fringe, loaded with conspiracy theories on both sides, loaded, frankly, with misinformation, who had been hyperventilating from the sidelines as marginal freakos, were slowly, inexorably shouting and ranting into the mainstream. And around it all was a general disaffection with American society, with economic disparities growing, income equality, a broken healthcare and health insurance system, all in the wake of the promises that Barack Obama had made. And more so than anything, Obama was the polarizing moment. A black president? Unthinkable. And then it happened. And then the left, everyone including Cornel West, celebrating that a brother had made it, that a black man was in the White House. And conversely, the conservative side of the house, outraged that America had come to that. And with it, the implicit racism and inequality when it came to what America and Americans considered American. Wow, what a moment. And with that, as we know, came a complacency on the part of the Democrats. This is common in every field, industry, specialty. The company, the product, the service, the individual who's on top suffers from the blindness and the thin air of being number one. You're no longer frisky, competitive. You're no longer scraping and working and suffering to gain an edge because you got it. And this makes you myopic to the ecosystem that spawned you in the first place. Consider IBM that missed the personal computer, then Microsoft missing the internet, and then social media, And then social media, Mark Zuckerberg missing mobile technology, and everyone missing the large language models that only in 2-3 years have completely turned the tech world, the economic reality of the world upside down. This is so common. Anyway, the centerpiece of that was anger stemming from the betrayal they saw of Bernie Sanders. His nomination allegedly blocked by the sinistral machinations of elitist, institutional, big equity interests who actually ran the Democratic Party. Bernie's mantra at the time, back in 2015, was echoed by Larry David on Saturday Night Live. I'm fighting for the working people of this country. And that resonated. Too bad Bernie got pilloried as a has-been socialist rather than a forward-thinking realist as to what the pulse of America was pointing toward. Once again, I need to repeat that because that is such a retrospective eye-opener. I myself am shocked to hear myself saying these words that couldn't be truer. Bernie Sanders got pilloried by his own party in 2015, right at the cusp of the MAGA revolution. Bernie Sanders was pilloried as a has-been socialist by the Democrats when the new Republican, the man who would completely kidnap, if you will, the entire Republican Party and make it his own, Donald Trump, focusing on what? You could swap those words and put them right into Donald Trump's mouth. The faux billionaire, con man, hustler, fighting for the working people of this country, which is still part of his mantra today. Second time in. The tariffs. Otherwise harpooning an economy which is on a roll. And why? To bring back manufacturing to this country, to bring back manufacturing of products when our economy in 2025 is 85% service driven. So for 1,000 jobs, Donald is going to throw 1 million workers under the bus. Why? Because he's fighting for the working people of this country. Amazing. So fast forward to 2024, and the working people of this country have spoken, not once, but twice. And here sit the Democrats, once slamming good old Bernie Sanders, stunned by every segment, including women and minorities, shifting toward the rekindled and revitalized, taken over GLP. Kevin and Bernie Sanders both proven correct. Out of touch with their own constituents, unable to fix a broken federal bureaucracy, the Democrats have failed not once, but twice. Kevin is like a character in a film who is so over the top and bombastic that nobody listens to what he's saying. He's a little bit like the fool in a Shakespearean comedy, where disempowered, the lowest rung of the socioeconomic scale, disaffected, irascible, bombastic. Why would anything ring true at all? And everything, repeat, everything Kevin was complaining about, likely going back to high school, has eventually rung true. And it's not the case of a broken clock being right 2 times a day. This is a guy who was on the ass end of our society since birth. And society, at least the mainstream element of it, finally caught up to his griping, accelerated by social media, no doubt, but also further fueled by the growing polarization of politics, our population, and this general feeling of having enough already. People were sick and tired of the status quo, and they wanted change. They didn't want same old, same old. They wanted change. And again, in retrospect, Kamala Harris versus Donald. And one would think that Donald was same old, same old. I felt that Kamala could probably take the election because Donald, who was fresh in 2015, was now the has-been insurrectionist of 2024. But who was president then? It was Joe Biden, Zombie Joe, who was the quintessential establishment Democrat, the final nail in the coffin of the legacy Democrat Party. Amazing. When you look back at stuff so self-evident and obvious, and when you're in the moment, even if there's only a couple possibilities in a binary system, there's so much branching and uncertainty, and perhaps inherent uncertainty, that there's just no way of knowing, or at least you don't think so until you look at it in retrospect. The wave function collapses, and of course, this wacko Kevin was right. Who knew? Now let's consider Bonnie. Back in the 90s, the freakiest and funnest nightclub in Chicago was called Vortex, located near the corner of Halsted and Addison on the north side, ironically not far from the police station on Addison. Such bars and discos were de facto safe places to meet, chat, carouse, entertain, network, make money, and get laid for gay, lesbian, transgendered people, still largely closeted, even in such a diverse, Democrat-governed American city as Chicago. One of the many regulars at Vortex in the 90s was Bonnie. And she's a Brazilian-Mexican transgendered woman who wore many hats and performed multiple roles: social critic, buzzing gadfly, and adept prostitute. Unlike the female impersonator showgirls from the Baton Club on Clark Street, further downtown, over-the-top drag queens from the burlesque shows. Check, 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 check. Unlike the female impersonator showgirls from the Baton Club or the over-the-top drag queens from the burlesque shows, Bonnie looked and acted natural. As they would say in the slang, she was pretty much unclockable. When a drag queen or a transgendered person was identified in the form of their biological or born gender, as it were, they were said to get clocked, like one would clock an athlete or a race car going around a track. Anyway, Bonnie looked very, very real. I found her alluring, intelligent, insightful, and savvy. She hated me and wasn't reserved in letting me know how she felt. Despite her nonstop abuse, I remained captivated by her dual nature. On the one hand, she not only criticized me to no end, but everyone else around her. On the other, She made her living as a stiff cock, ostensibly camouflaged as a woman. I just found her fascinating. Some would call her the ultimate hypocrite, but that's what makes a gadfly so entertaining. And in Bonnie's case, these superlatives and extremes and contradictions were so over the top that she was, as some would say, truly a character. And I love characters. Top of her list, even then, was hatred of all things, here's the thing, left of center. Paying her own way, she had zero patience and even less tolerance of people accepting any help from anyone else, let alone the government. Top of her list, she despised her fellow minorities the most. And even more than them, minority air quote victims who were also gay and transgendered. This is a fascinating point, and again, an incredible harbinger of what was to come and eventually sway our recent presidential election. Pollsters, pundits, they're often shocked to realize, at least through this lens, the obvious, that some of the biggest racists are those from ostensibly the most abused and disenfranchised communities. An extreme example is in Django Unchained. If you remember that movie and you remember the Sam Jackson character of Stephen, the house Negro, no one in that movie is more evil, twisted, and racist, inclusive of the master of the farm. Stephen is the worst. And that's because the only people he can put down and feel superior over are his own. Now, Bonnie had a slightly different point of view. Hers wasn't so much gaining control as it was demarcating her own turf, if you will. And this is even more psychological than practical. And this is an attitude reflected by many within the Latin population, especially in Florida, Miami, going full DeSantis. Many Latin people in Texas, even in California, who flipped Democrat to Republican because of the open border, because of a lax immigration policy that did two things. It essentially negated and made superfluous the effort made by so many millions of Latin people to follow the rules to get their green card and get their citizenship legally, on the one hand, and also the influx of illegals who were taking their jobs and crowding out their neighborhoods. So once again, the obvious in retrospect is screamingly obvious. And Bonnie, back in the 90s, exemplified a lot of this attitude of minorities being the ones to go hard on the conservative American political playing field. Now, the HQ, or headquarters of gay rights advocacy at the time, was another far more genteel bar down the street. The Show Tunes Playing Club, whose owners were active left-leaning Democrat supporters. Insisting she would never be caught dead in that place, Bonnie also hated what she called the hypocrite faggot elites, who seem to be fighting for everyone's civil rights while actually, quoting her, making bank off queers' tears, unquote. So even those who were active and ostensibly championing for equality, equal rights, were often seen by their own as making money and gaining advantage through those ostensibly humanitarian efforts. Now, despite being a nice Jewish boy from the suburbs, I sensed where Bonnie was coming from and more or less understood her point of view. While she was busy screwing straight-looking and straight-acting men in hotel rooms, literally, the self-proclaimed champions of gay and transgender rights were raking in millions off the gay neighborhood. Now, what did they really know or care about people like Bonnie, who are in the trenches dealing with the abuse? But as far as Bonnie was concerned, even more brutalizing than the abuse of society was the hypocrisy of, air quote, their own. Now, I adored her shiz and riz, and Bonnie and I have remained close friends for decades. The hatred that she felt for me flipped into a measure of admiration, if you will, as I got out of the crazy lifestyle and neighborhood, more by chance and accident than anything else. And she loves the fact that I podcast and write, and I maintain this ostensibly Pollyanna view of myself and the world, and I love to be creative and joyful. So I've kind of won her over after all these years that I'm not as big of an idiot as she thought I was at the time. And I'll count on her for being a good judge of character both then and now. But she's since hung her hat on her prostitution, gotten a degree. She is a hairdresser, teaches school. So she's chilled out too. Maybe that's why, talking about retroactively obvious things, she's a fan of me when before she was my greatest detractor. She's kind of gotten mainstream herself. So there you have it, mirror, mirror. But she's, of course, as feisty as she ever was, just as I'm as big of a big mouth as I was back then. And she rants with even more gusto against the subsequent years of woke and identity politics. And with extra zeal, get this, railing against the transgender rights movement. I did a podcast with her. I interview Bonnie. And I'll put the link in the description of this podcast. It's called Being Trans During Trump 2.0. And I found it fascinating because she doubled, tripled down on her apprehension, borderline hatred of transgender advocacy, and in ways, just like Kevin, Bonnie has been proven right as well. Because just as Kevin felt that the left, the establishment left, was not listening or concerned at all about constituents like Kevin, Bonnie felt, even in the 90s, that this emphasis on identity and turning identity into politics and ramming it down people's throats, whether they liked it or not, when at the heart of it, at least according to Bonnie, was this incredible hypocrisy and desire for power's sake on the count of the establishment Democrats. And she's proven to be right too. Look at the backlash to the backlash to the backlash of all the woke. And now what's going on? It's become institutionalized in the form of executive orders, actions against American universities by the federal government, actions against law firms. The list goes on and on. Had we only listened to Bonnie, had we only listened to Kevin. Bonnie's byline says it all. This is how she likes to humorously introduce herself. And I got her to put it into the signature line of one of her emails. I'm a Latina preoperative transsexual who identifies as a heteronormative Caucasian woman. And my preferred gender pronoun is she, her, go fuck yourself. How's that for a doozy? I love that. And I just think she is old school and new school fabulous. I'm going to say it again just because I love hearing myself saying it. I love saying it. I'm a Latina preoperative transsexual who identifies as a heteronormative Caucasian woman, and my preferred gender pronoun is she, her, go fuck yourself. Bravo, Bonnie. We love you. Far from self-loathing, Bonnie despises being talked down to, being patronized, being labeled a victim needing help. She is stubborn and strong and sees the Democrats as weak and disingenuous to this day. And just as an aside, a little crass, shameless self-promotion here, my new science fiction novel features a transgender character channeling some of Bonnie's sentiment. She is arguably less political, at least in the first book in my series, but that sentiment carries strong. And I was influenced by Bonnie. I was influenced by several other people I've known and I've talked to. But again, this is such a miss on the part of the Democrats' messaging, ideology, philosophy, and most importantly, their tactics for just winning a goddamn election. Now let's consider Vera. Latinx, she asked herself, assuming I wouldn't know the answer and not even caring. What the actual fuck is Latinx? And who the fuck thought that bullshit up? Now, I could try to do her Puerto Rican accent, sounding a little bit like Rosie Perez, but that might come across as comical. And I don't mean to turn Vera into a what the actual fuck is Latinx caricature. But I think you get where I'm coming from, and I think you get where Vera's coming from, especially within the context of Bonnie and Kevin. Like the vast majority of Mexicans, Central and South Americans, Caribbeans, and her fellow Puerto Ricans, she hated the designation and dismissed it as elitist, out of touch, and liberal buffoonery. Latinx. I mean, it sounds kind of science fiction. I would love to put Latinx into my next science fiction novel if it wouldn't be so patently absurd. Another deaf and dumb and blind move on the part of the progressive lefty ideologues. Now, when still an underage middle school student, Vera snuck out of her parents' house in San Juan on school nights to go hang out with the American and European rock bands performing at the music club nearby. Now, I've been to Puerto Rico, and I see what she means. San Juan is an awesome city. If you've been there, you know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't, go check it out. Trust me, I'm not making residuals from the tourist bureau. It's amazing because it captures the very relaxed resort town, beach resort town vibe that you'd expect a Caribbean city to hold. But it's still urban enough to be exciting and kind of crazy. And the Puerto Ricans have this kind of schizophrenia where on the one hand, they feel they're special, they're better than their other Caribbean neighbors because they are tied to the United States. And on the other, they have an inferiority complex because tied to the United States, they are second-class U.S. citizens. So that dichotomy and that contradiction is ubiquitous in Puerto Rico and when you're dealing with Puerto Ricans in Puerto Rico and even here. But that's a whole separate thing. Anyway, luckily, never taken advantage of, Vera, in these clubs as a teenager, going to see everyone and partying with everyone from the Scorpions to Bon Jovi when they were visiting. She'd hang out at the club, sneak in there. She lived to tell the tales, and she loved living la vida loca. So she's got some joie de vivre, just to mix cultural metaphors. Her father was a successful businessman, and the family also lived in New Jersey and sent Vera to a Midwestern university for her undergrad. The only Latina around, she was reviled and embraced, ostracized and welcomed, received some of the worst but mostly the best from being the attractive foreigner and exotic outsider among frat houses full of horny white boys. So she was a stranger in a strange land. She was put on a pedestal and denigrated at the same time. She was a type A female pursuing law at Marquette and eventually becoming a female minority success story. And eventually she landed a corporate attorney position back in New York City. So born into a stratospheric socioeconomic class compared to Kevin and Bonnie. So if Kevin was pretty much ghetto, thrown into our suburban white high school, and Bonnie, who was ghetto, at least in the form of, frankly, being a prostitute, a sex worker in a nightclub in Chicago, Vera, in contrast, marshaled her abilities and drive to flourish in contrast within a professional community throughout, leaping from that la vida loca into living what could by any stretch of the imagination be considered the American dream. And I think this is an important distinction to make among my four martyrs of the Democalypse. Whereas the first two were disenfranchised from birth, and Vera, who was discriminated against for both being female and a minority, nonetheless was able to use that to her advantage. Now, despite the many differences in her own superhero origin story, the Democratic Party pissed her off too. Passing the bar exam at first try, she proved herself worthy of the scholarship she deserved, then fought her way up the food chain after moving to New York City. She was hustling. She was working hard. Was she born with maybe not a platinum or silver spoon in her mouth, but definitely not a pewter one? But she did what she could with it and worked hard to get what she deserved. Now, meanwhile, around her, she saw others taking advantage of what she worked so hard to earn. Both of us big fans at the time of Bill Maher, We used to watch his show from her couch. The running joke, her attraction to his intelligence, fame, and money, and my jealousy of all of the above. What struck me at the time, though, and resonates even more strongly now, is how she took personally the implications of identity politics run wild and the resulting deterioration of values that once she herself held dear. And I find this internal contradiction deeply meaningful too. And this harkens to how the left lost many of their own ideologues in this rush to extreme wokeism. Quote, I went into law because I wanted to become a professional advocate for women's equality and minority rights, unquote. She told me that in her sultry accent, which again, I'm not going to mimic here. But when she got into the career jungle and started applying what she'd learned, life lessons came rapidly and decisively. Quote, a female, a Puerto Rican, sure, I endured discrimination. My skills, my work fought it, but not my vote, unquote. This really shook me at the time when I heard this, to the point where I remembered it, to the point where I am bloviating it to you again. A female, a Puerto Rican, sure, I endured discrimination. My skills, my work fought it, and not my vote. That last section holds all levels of irony. My skills, my work fought it. So she proved herself worthy despite the discrimination. And she got very little special treatment by way of what the woke and identity politic agenda tried to provide her. So although she kept loyally voting Democrat, her votes did not help her in the workplace where the discrimination continued, and actually self-destructed for her emotionally, because while she was eating all the shit that she had to eat to get to where she wanted to go, despite the fact that she was minority and female, there were a bunch of minorities, female and otherwise, who weren't applying skills and who weren't working and seemed to be getting into this country and hanging out in this country and taking advantage of many of the benefits of this country, while she voted for the Democrats, enabling them to swarm into this country, while not helping her in the least. Now, again, I am relaying Vera's opinions and point of view. And clearly, everyone expresses their own opinion through their own lens. Life is complex. There are two sides to every opinion. And we're just really mapping the territory of reality as best we can through our own filters. But what she says is important, not only in terms of whether or not it's veridical or not in a comprehensive kind of way, but it's very important to note simply the feeling behind it, which is Vera exemplifies the segment of the population, young to middle-aged, professional, hardworking. They are lawyers, they are doctors, they are business owners, they are making money, they are working hard. Every day is a Darwinian struggle in the jungle. And despite being minority, they have made it, they are making it happen. And the Democrat Party has continually let them down for all of these reasons, and they're over it. Kevin, Bonnie, and Vera represent the core constituency of the party. And they each, for their own reasons, began to question the status quo. And here's the thing. They started to wander years, if not decades ago. They were already living what was just brewing in the chat rooms and tweets, and in a way that was completely rejected and or ignored by the leadership of the Democratic Party. Bernie Sanders was raving and ranting, much like Kevin, Bonnie, and Vera years before. But the Democratic disease was festering, and it was even impacting emigres. And with that, I'd like to talk about Theodore. Quote, "They should arrest and deport all the campus protesters," unquote, he declared at a recent dinner, diving into his stake. How shameful that these disgraceful people disrupt classes and threaten other students. No country should tolerate this kind of disrespect and unpunished anarchy, especially the greatest country on planet Earth, the United States of America, unquote. And I am not reproducing his Eastern European accent. As an aside, I am about to record the audiobook of that same shamelessly promoted new novel, and I'm grappling with how to handle the accents. So if you're listening and you have any ideas, toss me a note in the little message to the podcaster section, because I really want to figure this out. Anyway, I digress. Theodore grew up under the regime of Nicolae Ceausescu in Romania and experienced the draconian effects of pure, unmitigated authoritarianism. Instructed what to do, where to go, and how to behave, any violations punishable by imprisonment and far worse. Theo made it his life's goal to get the hell out of that truly shithole country, and he eventually succeeded. Now, I was in Romania during that regime when I was in my teens. And just to cite an example, I went into a market, the equivalent of a supermarket for that country, and it was completely barren. The entire supermarket was empty except for a single shelf exclusively containing strawberry jam. Now, the regime of Nicolae Ceausescu was classically Marxist. So they had controlled supply chains. It was the people's farm. And people were living in squalor and poverty, while Ceausescu was opening up international relations with Israel and was the man at the UN. He was eventually gunned down on national television, much deserved, good shooting, but he exemplified the model of the ultra left-wing socialist tyrant, of whom we've got a few new ones, including and especially Maduro in Venezuela, and the list goes on and on. Suffice to say that Theodore here grew up in a shithole, ultra leftist, if you will, failed Marxist authoritarian state. And when he emigrated as an emigre, he went to Israel for a while, and he wound up in Caracas, Venezuela, speaking of which, where that tyranny forced him to leave. And here he is in the States over Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro, having run away from Nicolae Ceausescu. That's quite a group. If you want to put together a rogues gallery of shitty, leftist, authoritarian, tyrant assholes, you've got Nicolae Ceausescu, Chavez, and Maduro. Wow. Anyway, Teo endured all of them, which is relevant for this story. His third legal emigration to the States is, no doubt, his happiest one. His favorite saying becoming a family meme, triggered whenever he sees something great. Quote, "And that is why I love this country," unquote. And he really loves this country. You should see him smile. He's a taciturn Eastern European dude, and he beams when he's in a supermarket. And he is blissed the fuck out when he sees America at its best in terms of what we take for granted. Lack of endemic corruption, more or less efficiency when you want to buy something, when you want to do something. You tap an app and within hours, an automobile or a bundle of toilet paper appears at your door. He celebrates each and every act of what can only be considered, in relation to what he's endured, a libertarian, hyper-plutocratic efficiency. You order it, you got it, you live, you mind your own business, and that's as good as it's ever going to get, and as good as it's ever going to get is in the heartland of the United States of America. Thank you very much. Now, that all said, you can understand my own wonder and frustration when hearing him rant about arresting protesters. Remember, this is the same guy who went off that the government should come in and arrest all these people. And I said to him, of all people, you would be the least and last one I'd expect to be in support of the police and even the military arresting our fellow citizens. Your entire life story is fleeing from authoritarian dictatorships, and now you want one here? You are not understanding me, he threw back, visibly annoyed at my stupidity and naivete, no doubt stemming from being bamboozled by the liberal media. There goes another pinko commie lefty. He reiterated that he's not a Trump supporter and recognizes that there are indeed many reasons he loves this country, including exemplifying values of personal freedom and supporting endless opportunities. He's all about values, personal freedom, opportunity. But he felt that I was, quote, jumping to extremes, unquote. But I didn't want to let this go. I said that universities are private institutions. And even if they receive public funding, they need to police themselves. If they do things we don't like, we don't send our kids there. If they need help, they call it in. The government should never, ever cross that line because that is the oldest proven tool of autocrats to control education, especially higher education. He was there when they shut down the University of Venezuela. I was there visiting years ago. Years and years ago. In the early 90s, riots at the Venezuelan University, the University of Caracas, and the military was sent in. I saw that. He lived through it. But of course, we went round and round. Theodore was soon grimacing, shaking his head, and declaring our conversation finito, done. Now, my father was also of Eastern European descent, And he was also an authoritarian in spirit after authoritarians murdered 90% of our family. So my dad, who survived the Holocaust, personally witnessed atrocities, was personally the victim of atrocities, survived the war to become the biggest bigot and Archie Bunker raving Republican of his generation. Had my father still been alive in 2015, there's not a doubt in my mind that he would be the biggest MAGA maniac in the country. I see him now. I see his ghost wearing a Make America Great Again hat. And again, if he'd be alive, he was born in 1928. So that would make him 97 years old right now. If he'd still be alive, he'd be sitting there in his Archie Bunker chair wearing a Make America Great Again hat. My dad would be full MAGA. And my dad was someone the Carter Clinton Democrats failed to sway, just as the Obama Bidens have failed to sway Tio. Isn't that interesting? And it's very, very similar. Theodore, similar to Kevin, Bonnie, and Vera, could and should be a diehard liberal if you really look at it. Once again, the Puerto Rican ghetto kid, the transgendered prostitute, the Puerto Rican attorney, they should all be diehard Democrats by the old model. Playing by the rules. Tio, like them, instead sees other immigrants and many of his now fellow Americans breaking the law, being absolved of responsibility and accountability by, drumroll please, the Democratic Party, and by extension, failing and persecuting and disappointing him too. Tio sees mayhem. Tio likes an ordered, organized America. Tio likes the trains to run on time and the food to be on the shelves and everyone to shut the fuck up and mind their own business. And when he sees protesters, especially pro-Palestinian protesters, he wants them arrested. And he sees absolutely no contradiction or paradox, for that matter, between him enduring Ceausescu, him enduring Chavez and Maduro, and he's not enduring Trump. He might not be a Trump supporter and might not support everything Trump's doing, but he is Trumpy in the sense of go get them, go lock them up. And I haven't heard his opinion about throwing Harvard to the wolves and holding back hundreds of millions, even in research grant money for cancer because they are too woke and air quote anti-Semitic. And frankly, that whole anti-Semitic argument is basically just a beard on the face of the extreme right at this moment. And as a Jewish guy, the son of my Holocaust surviving dad, by way of identity, I have the right, at least in my own estimation, to be so bold as to say that. Now, what does this all mean? Well, I loved taking you through the stories of these four people whom I have known personally and continue to know, and demonstrating how they were way ahead of the curve in terms of their gripes, and how, at least in Tio's case here, exemplify the inherent contradictions, ironies, and paradoxes of People who have endured authoritarians and now embrace authoritarianism because the American left, specifically the Democrat Party, has so badly dropped the ball. The Democrats, as a result, are, as I've said, short-circuiting, licking their wounds, hurling blame. Some accuse the electorate of being willfully ignorant and irresponsible. I've had guests on this show, I'll put the podcast links in the description here too, claiming that Trump won because the American electorate is stupid. That's like having a product or service that fails and then blaming customers who were unable to recognize how awesome your product or service was. You need to fire the fucking marketing agency and get a new ad campaign. That's what needs to happen here. And it's even more ironic and frustrating because while all this was happening, Trump's ascendancy and the end of the Clinton-Obama era had been written on the wall for such a long time. Cue up Kevin, Bonnie, Vera, and Tio. And if you have any doubts, go ask the millions of disaffected voters. And you could construct a longer list than these four, covering a broader swath of the electorate, segment it down, break it up, do a Pew Research study as they do. For that matter, go check out Pew Research. They've already done the study. And all of this is being reinforced. I just gave you an N of 4 to show you how vivid this schism is and has been for decades. And the election bears it out. Trump assembled the largest multiracial coalition since Nixon. And it was fueled by macho bluster, the manosphere, channeling up that pent-up frustration. Men, disenfranchised men who are statistically doing worse than women, love the bravado, love the garbage truck, love the McDonald's drive-through, loved the chest-pumping, fist-raising bullshit of it all, the manosphere gone wild. And here's the thing, many women embraced it too because it made them feel more secure. And I've spoken to some of these. I haven't added these, but they're more like pinch hitting Orange County suburban moms. I didn't put them in my list because they tend to be Republican anyway, but they really love Trump, even with this macho bluster, because they felt more secure. This guy's going to shut down the border. This guy's going to kick ass. This guy's going to protect my family. And at the heart of our transforming politics is no doubt the end of American exceptionalism. And it's a presumption fostered by our own elitism and an illusion reinforced by the Democrats themselves, created, sustained, and grown to the point of absurdity because they don't listen to their own constituents. Who the fuck was doing market research for Kamala Harris? But the midterms are looming. And the reason I'm ranting now, it's early August 2025. I'm just some guy here back in Orange County. And the reason I'm ranting this way is that nothing seems to have been learned. As of this week, you've got the Democrats in the Texas legislature abandoning their roles and hiding out in New York and Chicago because they don't want to vote on the inevitable takeover of the maps, which will gerrymander the shit out of 5 of their seats. Now, I don't blame them, but that's the best the Democrats seem to be able to do in terms of rallying up any kind of attention on social media and broadcast news. Cory Booker can go deliver a 24-hour speech, longest ever, but I don't think anyone really gave a shit. And you got Chuck Schumer, who's threatening to send letters to Donald complaining about conflict of interest of his crypto venture, when he's frankly become the laughingstock not only of the country, but of his own neighbors in Brooklyn. Come on, Democrats. As I began this rant, I was talking about the myopia that happens when you're at the top. And this happens to everyone who's a hashtag winner. But the Democrats have been losing so badly for so long and in such a profound way, and to such an obvious and easy to message against contender as Donald Trump, that all we can do is look at this shit show with a gigantic what the fuck grimace. Impossible to predict. I will at least venture to recommend that the party needs to reconstitute itself from the bottom up. It needs young talent. It needs to listen to its constituents. And at the very least, it needs to adopt the fundamental rules of positioning, which is the bedrock of marketing and communications. Go one-on-one against the leader. You're number two in a binary system. You got to go full anti-Trump. And you don't go along this democracy route. That was a fail in Biden, that became a fail in Kamala when she was desperate and didn't know what else to do. You got to go against the Donald, and there's a lot to go against. The big, beautiful bill is a silver platter full of healthcare being taken away from millions of people and a redistribution of wealth from poor to rich. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink, Democrats, go for it. There's a few other stuff I've bloviated about leading up to the election. They'll be linked out in the descriptions too. But let's see how all of this shakes out. As the Chinese say, as a curse, may you live in interesting times. Our times have been interesting for a while, but I just think now, as a result of all this that I've been bloviating about over the past hour, I think it's just frustrating times. We live in a binary system, and there's only one half of that system firing on all cylinders. They've taken control, they dominate, they're unified, and whether you like it or not, they're engendering change that will remain central to the American landscape, ethos, and culture for decades to come. It's hard to see it now, but Trump, Donald J. Trump, will be the most noteworthy and memorable president since, talk about predictions, FDR. I have no doubt about it. And to a large extent, that distinction was handed to Trump on a silver platter by the ineptitude, incompetence, fueled by the lack of empathy of the American Democrat Party. And lastly, why the hell do you see Donna Brazile on the morning talk shows? I don't mean to pick on her, and definitely not because she's African American and female, but why is the world's biggest political loser still being consulted for her opinion? It's like Crystal, the neocon, flourishing for decades after the disastrous Second Iraq War. What the actual fuck, folks? I don't know how these pundits do it, but if their agent is listening right now, my name is Mookie Spitz. I am the Bald Bloviator, and give me a cut. Give me 10% of their contract, and I'll give you 100 times the volume of bullshit. Thanks again for listening. More to come. I had to get this off my chest and into your ears. Like, listen, share, and more in the works.